Yes, absolutely fine. So, first of all, it's such an amazing, such a pleasure to have one of our elder, one of our great elder, to be able to break it down the legacy of one of our great. So, hate him or like him, we gotta understand as African. So we need to study. We need to study the struggle. We need to study the fight of our ancestors. And Robert Mugabe now is our ancestor. But the question that we're asking you, as he was a revolutionary, as he was a hero, or he was a villain, because we have different views of Mugabe. Because if you listen to BBC, if you listen to all the Western media, they paint Mugabe as one of the great dictators in the world. But if you really study Mugabe, you will understand. He made some mistakes during this journey, but he was the very few African president who stood up against the imperialist forces in Africa. So, Baba Small, before we go to you, help us to understand the legacy of this great son of Africa, Robert Mugabe. In your thoughts, what is your view about Robert Gabriel Mugabe? So our listeners completely on.
Well, let's start with the British and Cecil Rhodes coming into Zimbabwe in the 1880s for the purpose of stealing the gold. Remember, in the 1700s, the Portuguese had attacked Zimbabwe, but the Zimbabwe people organized and wiped the Portuguese out and drove them out, and they continued to build their civilization. In 1880s, the British and Cecil Rhodes come in, and in 1888, the British gives the country literally to Cecil Rhodes in turn for whatever gold and diamonds and other things they would pay to the British Empire. So from 1880 until 1980, we see the British imperialists working with the Boers of South Africa, robbing, murdering, killing hundreds of thousands of our people, stealing the wealth of the land. The people resisted all through these years, but it isn't until 1980 when I think the doctor was in Como, who led one liberation front, along with Zimbabwe, who led ZANU, another liberation front, took them on head on and defeated them by 1980. By 1985, they had defeated the whites and could have destroyed what the whites are now calling Rhodesia. But before they could wipe them out, America and Britain stepped in and threatened Mugabe and the other brothers that they would invade with the British and the American army to protect Ian Smith and the whites if they didn't stop at this point and sit down and negotiate. This is when they go to England and they have a meeting at a place called Lancaster House. And then negotiate a deal that we would give the white Zimbabweans, who was less than 2% of the population, 10% of the parliament, and then we would give them 10 years to leave our land. Margaret Thatcher and I think Jimmy Carter agrees and said in 10 years we will pay the whites off and give your land back. 10 years came, they wouldn't stand up to the agreement. He waited another 5 years before the veterans of the revolution began to say, we're going to take our land back. And at that point, to do it in an orderly fashion, he sent the army of Zimbabwe in. And they didn't take all the land. They tell the whites, look, you got 5,000 acres. Our people have nothing. We'll leave you with 2, and you can farm your 2,000 acres, and we will divide the other 5 among soldiers. And then you have 5,000 acres. And they offered the whites a decent deal. They shouldn't have given them anything. But they wouldn't even accept that. They wanted to stay in control as they are in South Africa. in charge of all of the worthy farmlands. And it's at this point that the army of Zimbabwe and the youth of Zimbabwe and ZANU-PF began to take the land and redistribute it to its rightful owners. At this point, the West, who had reneged against the treaty at Lancaster House, Britain and America, decide they want to begin to put, boycotts on the country, and begin to cut off funds to the international arena and cut off trade.
Before you go there, Professor, obviously we understand that Mugabe, first he was a part of the stop. He was into the to the British system, because obviously he used to hang out with them. So lead to the Lancaster Agreement. Obviously he actually asserted Mugabe was part of the system. Well, obviously we understand that Mugabe could have done this by himself. So what about the role of the war veteran in Zimbabwe? Because we understand literally they pushed Mugabe into a revolutionary corner, right?
Right, because the war veterans and ZANU-PF had agreed to this 10-year hiatus, so the white folks can get themselves packed up and ready to get out. America and Britain had agreed to this also. But when the time came, Britain and America reneged and said, we're not going to support that process. It was at that, the war veterans did not move yet. They waited another 5 years trying to negotiate with the white farmers, with Britain and America. After 5 years, the veterans said, we're going to take the land back. And they begun that process of taking their land back by force. To have order in this, Zimbabwe under Mugabe sent the army in, and they passed a law on how this will be done, so that it could be done in an orderly and a legal manner. The West would not respect the legal process of the government of Zimbabwe. And that's when they began to do the boycotts. And there's another word. What is the word they use when they cut you off from the international money market and from the international banks and from trade with other people? And
they start imposing sanctions.
Yeah. So they began the sanctions program. The Zimbabwe tried to negotiate with them. They would not accept anything except leaving the white status quo. And at this time, Zimbabwe sent its army in to handle the redistribution of the land, which they begun. But they went further. They said, we're not only going to do that, we're going to take control of our mines. You control our diamond mines. You control the distribution of the diamonds out of the country. We're now taking control of the diamond mines. We're taking control of the gold mines. That's when the West went crazy with the sanctions.
Wow. So obviously, just they're talking about sanctions, right? Because we understand
sanctions is a form of warfare.
Exactly.
The struggles of military.
That's what we want to get to it, Professor Small. In our screen, we got the map. We got the map of Africa right there. So we got the map of Africa. So I'll put the map right on the screen for our brothers and sisters who are actually on air, so you can clearly see the map of Zimbabwe. So look at the map of Zimbabwe right there. Zimbabwe is surrounded by Botswana. That's a British colony right there. So surrounded by Zambia. That's a British colony right there. Surrounded by South Africa. That's a British colony right there. As you can see, as I'm talking to you right now. Mozambique is a Portuguese colony right there, as you can see. So what else? You got Zambia. This is German, British colony right there. And then you got Angola, Portuguese colony right there. So obviously, talking about, they pretty much isolate Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe couldn't trade with none of this country, because they used to they're blackmailing or put a pressure on that surrounding country. Can you elaborate more? Can you elaborate more on that regard?
Yes, what they did was to cut off trade, trying to make the revolutionary government of Zimbabwe submit, They could not. Mugabe and ZANU-PF was able to organize their people. Remember, one man cannot do this, but he is the leader. And ZANU-PF, under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, was able to maintain and sustain themselves despite these sanctions. Matter of fact, he went so far because the sanction crippled their currency. Mugabe decided, then we'll use the US dollar as our currency. Now, are you going to your dollar? But America passed laws in the U.S. Congress to increase the sanctions, especially when Mugabe and ZANU-PF decided that we're going to take control of our mines. So British mining company, American mining company, you get out. You're no longer the managers. You no longer run the mines. You no longer determine what comes out of our mines. You no longer determine the market price of our product. And they went and increased the sanctions even more. The only reason Zimbabwe went into an economic crisis had nothing to do with Mugabe. They went into the economic crisis because of the sanction by the West, led by Britain and America. Then they, in the process of this, they tried to assassinate him more than 14 times. Because when they first took over ZANU-PF, they merged the Rhodesian White Army in with their army and said, okay, let's live together in the country. Let's share the country. It was the leader of the Rhodesian white general who led the assassination attempt against him. And after he escaped to South Africa, he made the statement, well, if I had led those assassinations, he would be dead. You see, so they when they couldn't kill him, because the organization of ZANU-PF was too strong, the people was too supportive, that's when the sanctions get drummed up and escalated. And remember, sanction is warfare. Sanction says you can't deal with the World Bank. You can't trade with countries in the West. You can't trade with our colonial clients around you. So either you submit to us or we'll smother you economically. And they tried to
just really quick, talking about, let's to break it down in that regard. Talking about let me just say, talking about the warfare. They passed they went to the United Nations to pass the law to trying to intervene, because obviously British and the Bush and Blair, they decide to then they knew that they couldn't take him. So they went to United Nations, pushing the countries to intervene, to military. What fails? Because we understand the Russia and the Chinas, they veto. So what stopped them to not intervene? Because they really wanted to get rid of him by any cost.
By any cost. But by this time, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, I keep thinking of Mozambique, but Zimbabwe, being one of the so-called frontline states, had helped the leadership of South Africa, had helped the leadership of Namibia, had helped the leadership of Mozambique. And these forces was also telling the West and speaking up in the UN, if you fight Zimbabwe, you fight the rest of us. You see? Mm-hmm. And so people don't know that story. And so those people who Zimbabwe, that's why it's sad today to see what's going on in South Africa. When it was Zimbabwe, that was the refuge for the South African freedom fighters before Nelson got out of jail, you see. And so now you've got a Zimbabwe with an army, one of the best armies in Africa, with the people that support their revolution. Mugabe never took over a government. He was elected by his people in multiple elections. And all of the elections except one was sanctioned by the international observer community as being at the level of any other election in terms of corruption, meaning there was nothing to say this elections was corrupt to the point that he shouldn't be there. I mean, they gave the approval that this was a fair election. Then the Americans and the British formed what I think was the National Democratic Front, or the
NDC. They found NDC.
Right. And they tried to run that party, but the party, it couldn't win. And in the second go round, that party split into two and went into fighting and just lost their strength. And the leadership of that party, was ostracized by the people of Zimbabwe. They kept trying to prop it up from the West, but they couldn't do it. Because remember, you can't do what Mugabe did without having the support of the majority of your people. You'll always have dissenters because people are struggling. And when the West put the economic sanctions on, it drove people into an economic depression. And people want to get out of economic depressions any way they can. And many of us, because we are ignorant, will sell our souls to the West. Well, most Zimbabweans didn't go that path. They supported ZANU-PF, they supported the military arm, they supported Mr. Mugabe, and they re-elected him over and over again.
Professor, talking about the NDC. So we had one of the predominant opposition party called Morgan Tsvangirai, because it was found by basically the British has given him a lot of money to trying to take over the power over there.
They gave them money and intelligence assistance and military assistance. They were prepared to overthrow that government, but ZANU-PF was too organized for them to do so.
So in that case, what is your thoughts about this continues? Because we understand this is the game that they've been playing on forever in Africa.
Yes.
So funding another party, funding somebody, the unsatisfied group, in order to take over. If you not agree with them, they're using other brother. They give him a lot of money to then take over the country. So what is your thought about? Because we understand the Zimbabwean situation, the Zimbabwe revolution, is one of the most resilient in Africa, because Mugabe stood up with these people. They literally built a block to say, you know what, or either you with us or you against us. So what is your thought about this? About the resilience of ZANU-PF and the war veteran in general, because it wasn't only Mugabe, it was the war veteran that came together.
That's why I like to say ZANU-PF, because the war veterans is a part of the party. So it is the party led by Robert Mugabe, and the party, obviously, you'll always get some dissenters along the way. But the party obviously trusted his leadership. It is the only country in Africa that the European imperialists and the American imperialists was not able to break or subdue or to make them submit. Despite the economic sanctions, he kept that nation in the hands of Zimbabweans. He kept the wealth of that nation in the hands of the Zimbabweans. And that's what they're still worried about. How are we going to get the gold mines back? How are we going to get the diamond mine back? What kind of deal can we cut in order to lift the sanctions? And that's why the frontline African states and the southern African states have been rallying, telling the West to lift these sanctions off of Zimbabwe. There was a beautiful speech by the young brother coming out of South Africa yesterday, explaining this, that they need to lift these sanctions, because it is the sanction that has harmed the people of Zimbabwe. It is the sanctions from the West that destroyed the economy of Zimbabwe. But what is extraordinary, despite the sanctions, Mugabe kept that nation running. Despite the sanctions, it wasn't just the sanctions of you can't trade, you can't get medical supplies, you can't get technical equipment, you can't get high-tech equipment to run your industries. They block all of these things. But in spite of that, Zimbabwe under Robert Mugabe was able to sustain themselves as a nation free of imperialism and colonialism, a freedom which they won with the barrel of a gun. Nobody gave them flag independence. They took it. They defeated the South African army. They defeated the British intelligence, they defeated American intelligence, and they defeated the white Rhodesians under Ian Smith.
So obviously it's just such an amazing, because the time here is flying quickly. So we got a lot of message here all over the world from our brothers and sisters that wanted to really engage and interact with us. But we're definitely going to have another show just to read the message, because we can see a lot of message coming in. But the most important thing is for you to understand the great legacy of our ancestors. Don't let the BBC, don't let the Western media brainwash you about our history. We have to tell our history. That's why we're here with our great elders, to be able to break it down, the legacy of our great ancestor Mugabe. So we got about 5 minutes to go, 7 minutes. Brother Hoshin, if you had a last message to send to Mugabe, to our ancestor Mugabe, what is your last message would be to Mugabe?
My last message would be, a great works now gather the great ancients, so that we can now complete the works that our great patriarchs and matriarchs has sacrificed for over 7,000 years. We have been sacrificing. So that is a message I would be saying to him, my brother, gather all the great ancestral warriors and bring us together, because we are fighting a battle. We're at war both at high and low places, and we need all of our spirituality to finally conquer the beast and the dragon, my brother.
Wow. So obviously, before I let you go, because I'll end with our elder, because we got to give, tradition, we got to give our elder the last word, Professor Small. But before we let you go, Brother Hoshin, talking about the revolution, because you came from you are on the land of our great Marcus Garvey. So do you reckon, because Jamaica's been a footstep, it's been a beacon of a Rastafari revolution, of our great African pride, do you reckon the world need to be connected even more with Jamaica? Because the world only know Jamaica by reggae, by do you reckon the Western being misled the world to understand Jamaica is purposely done, or it's just a way of, it's just a process now? Do you reckon
well, without a shadow of a doubt, my brother, the role of this little rock here in the enslavement of Africans from the west coast, the Ivory Coast of Africa, as is well recorded. You know, that is why many of the inspirational leaders that we found in America and all over, you'll find that most of them came from Jamaica. Our contribution to the liberation and the freedom of our enslaved people is second to none. So in that reality, where Jamaica is now positioned, because I must also remind our people that Jamaica was the only place out of Africa that was given position on the Organization of African Unity, and still hold that position today, but we've never taken it up because our government is still under the Queen's Council and not under the King's Council. And we are now seeing the Queen Council, the fragmentation of it, it's breaking to pieces, because we will never be under foreign sovereign rulership.
Wow. So I think are you still there? Are you still online? Oh yeah, okay. So going to Professor Small, because extremely important for us to really understand. We are because we follow the footstep of our ancestors, of our elders that are still alive. And Professor Small is being one of our great elder that's been leading by example, how we have to go back. Because remember, this is a year of Sankofa, returning back home. Not only returning back home physically, but spiritually return to ourselves as well. Know that itself. So Professor Smalls, the year of Sankofa right now, starting 2019, do you reckon we have to now taking the legacy really seriously? Because you've been doing this, and then you're still alive, you're still doing, despite with all the blocks and all the, you're still doing it. Do you reckon our young people need to really understand and study you that's still alive, and then all of our elders, like such a our ancestor now, Robert Mugabe, because otherwise we're still going to be fooled by the West and then denigrate the fight of our elders. Do you reckon it's about time for us, the younger generation, to start really taking the responsibility?
Oh, absolutely. But first, let me just give praise to Jamaica. And let's start with Jamaica. Has been such an extraordinary historical model. When we go back to Sister Nanny, we go back to Brother Kojo, we go back to Kofi, we go to Paul Vogel, we come all the way up to Michael Manley, and for God's sake, the Honorable Marcus Garvey. So if people just study the history of Jamaica, you will get a lesson in how to free your mind. And now we can come to your question. The young people must study the history of African people from the point of view of the writers who are African. You see, the imperialist is writing one version of our history, but we have African historians all over Africa and the diaspora that's writing our history from the African point of view. You must know yourself, and you cannot know yourself by studying yourself from your enemy's mind. Though you should know your enemy's mind, but you must study yourself from your ancestors' minds and the minds of your brothers and sisters. Because the responsibility for the freedom of our lies in the hands of our youth. And what I would say to Brother Mugabe, in the Yoruba, I studied the Yoruba people's tradition and their expression of the African sacred science, and they have a word called awu, and it says, go back, go and come. And so, and it says that when a baby is born, that baby has come back. And that baby has come back with a message and a responsibility from the ancestor. When an elder dies, a righteous elder like Mugabe, he goes, we whisper in his ears and tell him the message to take to the ancestors. Tell him what our conditions is, our situation is, and tell him the type of mind we now need to be sent back. And I'm sure Mugabe has taken that message. And I'm sure the Council of Elders among the ancestors is preparing the new houses for the new spirits to come back with the tools necessary to take us to the next level.
Wow. So as you can see, Professor Small, a message to the entire black African/black people worldwide, because we've been following your work, your amazing work in Ghana, in New York, in the United States. A message to the entire African people worldwide, because we are. I'm glad that I had the pleasure to meet you, to talk to you, because we have to understand, without all of you, without all of our great ancestors, we don't have no leadership, because there's so many, very few leaders, African leaders, who really understand it's about the empowerment, it's about living the legacy. And people can say anything about Mugabe, but the greatest legacy that he left, at least Zimbabwe is free. Zimbabwe is free. So
and that is a great legacy when you consider, I think the brother's Robin Walker, or Robin, what's Robin's last name?
Say again?
Robin, Professor Dr. Robin, his last name Walker. I keep, when you
yeah, Robin Walker, yes.
Yeah, he wrote a book, When We Ruled. Everyone should get a copy of that book. Sheikh Dia, The Unity of Black Africa. Everyone should get a copy of that book. Kwame Nkrumah, Neo-Colonialism. Everyone should get a copy of that book. Anything that Chinwezu has written, get it and read it. 2,000 Seasons by Amma. Get that book. These are the literature that our great minds, some of which our ancestors now have left us, and some are still here. And there's a book by Nana Kwame Nkrumah, King of Esukadu in Ghana, Western region. 800 pages on governance and culture in Africa.
Wow.
Get those books. I hope you have these down so you can at other times to our people. It is a question of knowing yourself. It is a question of knowing your ancestry. It is a question of studying your victorious ancestors, Kwame Nkrumah. Certainly our great father who has just left us, Mugabe, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Patrice Lumumba, and Sankara. We could go on. The ancestors and the gods have sent us so many powerful, beautiful spirits. Let's study those powerful spirits. They may have killed them, but they didn't stop them from leaving us the information we need to go forward with. And the byword should be freedom or death. Freedom or death. As said to us by our great Dessalines in the Haitian Revolution when he gave us coup d'etat, boule kai. You cut off your enemy's head and you burn their abodes down. Coup d'etat, boule kai, freedom or death. That should be our mantra. Freedom or death. I'm not going to bring a baby into this world unless I bring him into freedom. And if I have babies in this world, I will not live my life except to bring them freedom. It's freedom or death. Coup d'etat, boule kai, to our enemies.
Wow, wow. And then a message to the entire African presidents as well, because we understand it is about time for them to stop all the nonsense about the border, about visa. We all want us African. So
these borders are going to come down. The youth will tear these borders down. The youth of Africa are going to begin to start marching across these borders with no papers in hand, and will not allow themselves to be stopped. It's already being talked about that they will cross any border they want to cross. And as this movement builds, they'll see they'll have to take the borders down. Because the reality is, you and I know the reality. There aren't any borders. They got a road with a checkpoint stopping 1,000 people, 5,000 walking through the bush across the border all along the way without going anywhere near that road and checkpoint. So let's not having these illusions of a border that the people have never allowed to restrict them anyway.
Wow, wow. So obviously the Berlin Conference had a major role to play, because now we got Africa dividing like a piece of cake. So talking about that, we got one side the Francophone, we got another side, we got the Portuguese, we got another side, you got the French. Do you reckon it is about time for us to really merge? Because we understand we're still under the trap of their system, because we still got the French colonies still pay tax or something for the French government. Do you reckon the African government, they should start really taking a firm step regarding the African unity? Because we understand it will come first from them, because they're the lawmakers, they're the politicians, and
I was just having a conversation this week with one of my elders, who was my college professor, and he was also an ambassador from Uganda for many, many decades. And he was explaining to me what's going on in East Africa. Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, and I think Sudan is now coming in, Malawi, Rwanda, Burundi. And what the discussion is? Taking down the border and creating a one state out of all of those nations. They're already trying to write this up. They're already discussing where the capital is going to be. So the thing is in process. The model is in process in East Africa right now as we speak. And if the East African group of nations is able to tear down those borders, I guarantee you the others will follow very quickly.
Wow.
And you have in West Africa, like I said earlier, where the West African states are trying to come up with a single West African currency. The only difficulty they're having is trying to work out this Francophone enslavement economic process with France, and I think they're going to work that out. And then they'll be moving for a single banking system, and then dismantling of the borders. It won't come easy and it won't come slowly, but the fact that it is in process with East Africa being farther ahead than anyone else. We can see that day coming. And probably, I'm sure, I may not be here at 74 now, but in your lifetime, you should see it.
As you can see, Professor Small still alive. As you can see, still on. As you can see, the African map.
I am still alive.
Exactly, still alive, right there with you. You can see clearly, it's still alive. Professor Small, we got still the map right there. We got the African map. We still got the Africa map right now on screen. As you can see, there's the way Zimbabwe is, the R. So, do you reckon if we manage to gain control economically, because Congo has a major role to play. Forget about Congo.
Congo, I forgot about Congo. Congo, Angola is an essential part of this. And the warfare in Congo, Angola have been so brutal, and so little information comes out about the warfare. Even with the new elections last year, and them getting a new president, but the imperialists forced them into a partnership with the old president. But even with that, we see a step forward because it was the Congolese people that voted the old one out, you see. And so that tells you that the people are gaining a consciousness and an understanding. And I think as the young people, especially, there's a movement in the country of young people who are very close to the indigenous tradition and follow the indigenous spiritual system and political structure in the Congo. No one will talk about it, but Queen Diambi is very close to these young people, and they don't have a queen over the entire Congo. And it's not a ceremonial queen. She's the first queen over what was Congo, Angola, since Nzinga. You see, and I think it's been about 3 years now that she's been on the throne, moving all over the world, trying to tell the story of the Congo. Congo is going to be essential to the unification of Africa. That's why they're fighting so hard. That's why you saw the Pope going over there the other day. He's trying to hold on. People don't understand the role Christianity and especially the Catholic Church play in imperialism and colonialism and genocide in Africa. The church has no business, so where's all that wealth coming from? It's all coming from Africa. So get real, wake up, look your ancestors in the eyes and say, I belong to you and you belong to me. Study your history. You mentioned the Berlin Conference, where Europeans sat down and decided, we're going to chop Africa up between us. And then we're going to wage what should be called the First World War, where every European nation with their armies invaded Africa, and they don't even call it a war. Killing millions of our people, taking control of our entire continent, dividing up between themselves. But if you look, we had some great warriors, both in Zimbabwe, in South Africa. And the people don't even know the story of Sechuweya, you know, and the wiping out of 2,000 British troops in the flash of an eye and brought the Robespierre government down in England. You know, most people don't know this is happening right at the time. That's happened just before the Berlin Conference. Right after the Berlin Conference has gone on, then you get Muhammad Ahmed in the Sudan, who will take on an army of 20,000, 30,000 Brits and Egyptian and leave only 3,000 alive in the Battle of Khartoum. And then you can go to Brother Kojo, who takes over. We resisted. We did not submit without a fight. But they had guns and we didn't. But even without the guns, we put up a battle that you need to study. You'll be so proud of your ancestors. You'll be so proud to be a part of this history and this race we call Africa. When you study your history, you'll get some backbone, you'll get some heart, you'll get some courage, you'll get some pride that'll make you want to free this continent.
Wow, wow. As you can see, Professor Small, you have to study your history and you have to understand the power of our traditional leaders. Just before you go, Professor Small, elaborate the traditional leaders, because they got a major role to play. Even though the West are trying to whitewash and try to eradicate our traditional leaders, but it still exists. Shout out to Queen Diambi. Shout out to Queen Diambi. Shout out to our great queens. We still have kings and queens in Africa, and they're trying to brainwash of just follow Queen Elizabeth. Just follow. We still got kings and queens in Africa, traditional leaders that they've been stepping on. They've been saying, okay, you know what? Enough is enough. We're not going to be having a warfare anymore. Not be shooting. We're going to be doing this spiritually now, culturally now. And shout out to Queen Diambi to lead this movement as well, and alongside Professor Smalls and all of our great leaders in Africa and outside Africa. Professor Small, a message to our traditional leader before we let you go as well. Message to our traditional leaders.
Yes, I look at Queen Diambi, who was one of my students when she was in the university, and I feel I'm proud that I might have had a little influence on the type of political and spiritual leadership she has today, and we are still father and daughter to this day. I was invited to Congo for her coronation, but the Congolese government blocked me for whatever reason. They haven't said why they wouldn't allow me. Even though all of the kings of Congo petitioned them to let me into the country, they refused. They said, no, we will not let him in. I think that was your fault, because we were just we had done a radio show shortly before that. So, and I was kind of critical of them. But,
Professor Small, I'm sure it's the American government that did that, because they blackmailed they blackmailed them. So they've been doing that to me. They did that to one of our elders as well that went over there. So I'm sure the American, that's one of the things as well before, like the American government, the British government, they're scared of hell of us going back. They're scared to hell of us going back. Go ahead, Professor.
Let's go. If we go to Ghana, we have a king. He was here yesterday, and I couldn't get to the UN to hear him address the General Assembly. His name is Ose Tutu. He is the Asante Hene of the Ashanti Nation of Ghana. And the Asante traditional kingdom is as fully intact today as it was 300 years ago. If you go to the western region of Ghana, you meet Nana Kwabena Nketiah V, who's the king of Esukado. He's also a university professor with a PhD in politics and history, but he also sits on the throne. And people don't understand, when the king and queen in Africa sit on the throne, they're not a despot like Elizabeth or these other people in Europe. When they sit on that stool, or sit on that skin, or sit on that throne, they are considered to be the ancestors. Listen to me now. When they sit on that stool, when they sit on that skin, when they sit on that throne, they are, at that point, to all of their people, the ancestors. And that's who they speak for, and that's who the people address. When they're off of the stool, when they're not sitting in state in that way, then they're the king, the monarch, the political administrator. And so when you understand there's a spiritual role to these positions, as well as a secular role to these positions. But the thing that's important to know is that our traditional structure is still intact in the Congo, is still intact in Angola, is still intact in Nigeria, is still intact in Ghana, is still intact in Kenya. If you go to Uganda, you meet Kabaka, you know, or Ethiopia. But you meet the Kabaka in the Congo. He's the king of the Bakongo people. You meet the Toro king. You meet the other great kingdoms. We don't talk about the great kingdoms who work in some sort of relationship with these new secular government, but they have not allowed themselves to be dismantled. The people defer to the traditional government first. That's their first loyalty. Their first loyalty is not to these Western nation-state concept. That's their second loyalty. And I think the more we learn about this, and the more we understand how our structures work, the more we'll bond ourselves to our ancestors and get a greater sense. That's why history will erase the white man's mystery.
That's why, brothers and sisters, kings and queens of Africa, we must need the support. because we as Africans, as the new generation of Africa, we have to support our elders. We have to, like technology-wise, we have to support them. We the warriors now, because they got the wisdom, they got the spiritual power. We as a younger generation, we have to just be there for them. That's why shout out to Professor Small, Queen Diamond for the amazing work. Because remember, we're not doing this physically anymore, fighting with gun. No, we're doing this spiritually and culturally. We have to understand
let's define spirituality, because we don't want them to confuse African spirituality with Western Christianity, Islam, or Judaism, because neither of those are spiritual systems. Those are religions. Religion is an addendum to spirituality. Religion is a tool of spirituality if properly used. So when we talk about spirituality, we're talking about our relationship to our reality. We're talking about our understanding about reality. We're talking about our understanding of our ancestors' reality. Even science is saying now, when the body dies, something leaves it. Yes, the something is you. And let me just say to my people simply, if you understand our culture, you'll understand every time you give birth, you've given birth to yourself. And when birth was given to you, your parents had given birth to themselves. You are your ancestors. Come back. Understand. And your children is your continuation of your beingness into eternity. You can't give birth to a strange anomaly. You gave birth to yourself. A man and a woman deposit the totality of themselves in an egg and a sperm. And that egg and a sperm come together and recreate the two people. So you give birth to yourselves. That's African cultural understanding. What the West is trying to call the string theory or the theory of one, that's our culture. We don't need a string theory or a theory of one. We already understand the oneness of the totality. That's why I think it's the Ewe people of Ghana say Sobelisa, meaning that God, that's their name for God, which means the totality of creation itself. And when you understand that our spirituality is a sacred science that has an understanding of all the elements of nature and our relationship to those elements, all of the elements of nature that makes up our body and its relationship to cosmology, cosmology's relationship to ecology, and ecology relationship to us, the human being, and the interaction to keep the harmony and balance thereof with the I think it's the Igbo people call Omanele, balance and harmony within and without. So we have a sacred science that we call spirituality, but don't confuse our sacred science with Western religious theocracy.
Wow. As you can see, we're definitely going to... it's such an amazing to have in this show, knowing that we are talking to one of our great... So that's why we want to send a special shout out to absolutely all of our great ancestors that paved the way for us to be here. Shout out to Kwame Nkrumah, as Professor Small says, Kwame Nkrumah, Kwame Ture, Queen Nzinga, Queen Pravita, our great Eric Tubman, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, absolutely everybody, Al Selassie, absolutely all of our great elders all of our great ancestors that paved the way for us to be here today. And obviously, to close out, we want to send a shout out to Professor Small, Queen Diambi, all of our great elders that are still alive, that have been fighting, not with the guns anymore. Because just because we love ourselves don't mean we hate others. We don't hate anybody. We just love ourselves. We understand who we are. And then having Professor Small in our platform is a way of sending the wisdom across the world through our radio, TV.
Know thy history. Study your history. Your history is the mystery of your ancestors. When you study your history, you're studying the messages that your ancestors have left to guide you into the future. You must know history. History is the story of yourself before yourself, of a time before this time. That's about you.
Last message, we got 1 minute, Professor Small. Last message for all the Zimbabwean brothers and sisters, kings and queens.
Yes,
include our great Mugabe.
Yeah, Zimbabwe, we love you. Mugabe forever. He proved to us it's freedom or death. Even as an old man, he was willing to stay in the leadership and die if it would ensure the freedom of Zimbabwe people to own your land, to own your minds, to own the mind that's in your head as well as the mind that's in the earth, and to give you an intellect, to give you your own language system and keep it intact, to give you a knowledge of yourself before yourself, so that you know you're not the bastard child of England or the Dutch Boers or the Americans, but you are the kings and the queens, the princess and the prince of the greatest ancestor that the divine has ever created as human beings. You're the Zimbabwean. Wow. You're from, the days of your ancestor with the in the belly. You're there with all of the great things before we ever saw the white man. Remember, before they conquered us, the Rhodesians and the British, we decimated the Portuguese. We destroyed the Portuguese army and drove them out of Zimbabwe. We destroyed the Arabs before them and drove them out of Zimbabwe. But the new gun technology defeated us with the British. But that's just one moment in history. We have hours and days and weeks and months and years and centuries of histories to go. Let's own those time and get past this time.
Wow. And Professor John Eric Clark is saying the black man is one of the most dangerous fighting machine the Creator ever created.
No, the black family, not the black man. The black family is one of the greatest fighting machines ever created.
Absolutely. Emphasizing the black family. That's why they're scared. They're trying to push the black man. They're trying to push the black women away from home. We have to understand it. It's about to bringing the family alive. And when I mean the family, it's not only about boyfriend and girlfriend, not even about, it's our family worldwide. It's all about family worldwide now. That's what it's about. Wow. Professor Small, it's such an amazing, so we're definitely going to get in touch with, just so we can hear more wisdom from you, and then any contact, any updating of your latest projects that you're doing in Africa or in the United States?
Well, right now, the hotel that we own in Africa, our organization, we are now merging with a Ghanaian, fully owned Ghanaian hotel chain, and with an aspect of the Ghanaian government. So that's a very big plus, with the diaspora and the government and the private sector coming together to even expand ourselves. A lot of the programs that we are doing, educational supply programs, medical supply programs to villages, we're escalating that for next year in multiple places on the continent. But we're also trying to encourage the young people to learn and master this technology, especially in communications, so that we tell our story, our way, to our people. And you young people, you know this technology. I'm OG, you know what I mean? Old gangster, old school. It's your time to take this technology and education, learn the history that the elders have brought for you, and give that history to our young people through your music, through your dance, whatever you call it. Hip hop on this side. In Ghana, we call it hip life. In Congo, what do you call it? But that music that has come from your soul, that music that the ancestors have given to your generation, use it to carry the message of your freedom possibilities, just like generations before you did.
We don't want to let you go, but we definitely, sadly, we have to go. Just like 1 minute more. When is a visit? When is a visit to Congo and Angola? Because people are there. People want you there. Like I got so many people in Angola and Congo say, when you gonna have Professor Small here? Like, I'm sure our interview we're gonna be sending to them. They're gonna be put on a DVD.
Well,
that's the only way for them to share it.
Some books. So you and I have to talk, because I have some books I have to get to the brothers in Angola. But now that we have a new government, a semi-new government in Congo, maybe I'll be allowed into Congo. You know, I'm going to leave it to you to get me into Angola. Unless I'm going to take off some time. I do have to have some knee surgery in the winter, and it's going to take the winter and the spring to heal. But by July, I will be back up and running properly again. In the meantime, I work from this computer and this telephone, and I try to reach my people around the world.
Wow. So hopefully next year we're going to be having Professor Small in Angola and Congo, because remember, we're from the kingdom. We're from the same king. We're from the kingdom, because we don't really go this such thing in Angola and Congo, because we're from the kingdom of Congo. So that's why we need you to go ahead.
Much of my family come from the kingdom of Congo. I'm from South Carolina, and the first people that were brought there from home by the Portuguese, and then by the Spanish, and then by the English, were mostly from the Congo, and that's part of my lineage. You know, I also have lineage that takes me to West Africa and to East Africa, but the Congo is the base of my family lineage.
Wow. So as you see, peace and blessings, Alfa Kuabo here at Radio Diamond. We extend the time because obviously we're talking, we're having this amazing conversation, this amazing show with one of our great, and we talked about the legacy of one of our great ancestors now. Robert Gabriel Mugabe is a hero, is an African leader, is an African warrior, is one of our great, absolutely. Regardless what you say, hate him or not, if you listen to BBC, if you listen to CNN, you will hate him. But we don't
study the history, go online, study the history of Zimbabwe. If you just study the basic history of Zimbabwe, you will know this man is a great hero. You'll know he was a great warrior. He came out of the bush with the AK-47 in his hand, and he killed his enemy, and he stepped over their bodies. He made those who made our people suffer paid, and he took the land back and give it back to the people.
Wow. As you see, Professor Small, obviously, because we still had some technical, some sound issue. I think it was coming from Professor Small, but at least you heard the message clear. It's about freedom or death. It's about unify. I'll switch you on, Professor Small. I'll switch you off, just to let you know. It's about freedom or death. It's about unify or die. We have to understand this. So it's such an amazing, I cannot say enough. So we're definitely going to keep in touch, and then keep the conversation alive every single Sunday from 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock here at Radio Diamond, aka show. We're totally out. Peace.